Welcome to Purple Coach Conversation with Anne and myself. I'm Tanya. Our goal is to normalize, educate, and inspire conversations around diversity and inclusion. Anne and I are both coaches, mothers, entrepreneurs. We're not diversity experts, but our aim is to have conversations with people that will have something interesting and unique to say about their journey and experiences in diversity and inclusion. Today, it's not just Anne and myself who are coaches, but Tahmid, our guest, is also a coach. He's a program manager influencing EU sustainability policy. He's also a coach and a writer. He just published a book called Make Diversity Matter to You. And it's thanks to this book and thanks to a coach that has become my coach recently, Alex Manzi, that I discovered Alex. Sorry, not Alex. I discovered Alex, but then I discovered Tahmid. So thank you for being here. And I would love for you to introduce yourself and also to kind of tell the fun story about, how you got to also know my new recent coach, Alex Manzi, and how we got to connect
Yeah,
today.
for sure. And thanks so much for inviting me here as well. It's a real pleasure. And yeah, I love that sentence of that you're not diversity experts, and it just made me think, who is a diversity expert? I mean, there's just so much to it, and suddenly I've got this book, so I'm like, oh, am I an expert now? I don't know. Either way. So just in terms of myself, so yes, my name's Tahmid Chowdhury. So I grew up in the UK. My parents originally came from Bangladesh. So I was born in the UK. I studied for a lot of my life in the UK. I spent 2 years in Bangladesh. We kind of went across when I was, I suppose, I think I was like 7 or something like that. But then came back. I did my studies in the UK. I did a year abroad in France, and I'm actually now living out in Belgium. I did my master's here, came back to London, and now working out in Brussels, where, yeah, working a lot on EU sustainability policy. Before that, I was working in the UK government on EU policy, Brexit, a mix of things. And it's there that I got a lot more experience on diversity and inclusion. I did it as part of my role for 2 years. I also chaired the Race and Faith Network in Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Um, and yeah, I had a number of different interesting experiences, but we can touch upon that in a moment. I guess just to talk about the book, it's yeah, as Tanya you mentioned, it was a funny old thing with Alex. So that's Alex Manzi, and I think I have so much love for that guy. He's a really phenomenal person. So you're going to get so much out of the work you do with him, Tanya. I actually was going on a retreat with my current coach. He's called Sachin, and Alex was also part of this retreat, and we decided to go to this event on the 30th of April happening in London. So I jumped on the Eurostar, and it was there where, and this really influenced a lot of the book, and certainly later chapters. It was an event called the Ultimate Event, where it was Steve Hardison and other people talking, and Steve Hardison is kind of the what I would describe as the protagonist of this book, the Ultimate Coach, and I do actually reference that in the book, and that's really influenced me. And he talks a lot about commitment and who you're being on a day-to-day basis, and that really inspired me. Where I started this book in 2020. I didn't know how to go deeper, but it was that really prompted me for the later chapters. So anyway, Alex actually had a self-published book of his own, and he kind of handed it to me, and I was just like, oh yeah, I've got a half-written book. Because as I say, I'd kind of had this burst of energy after Black Lives Matter. I guess quite like you both in terms of like, oh, I wanted to do more. Um, but then I didn't know where to take it, and having gone into this space, I now kind of did. And so, yeah, Alex was like, "All right, well, do you want to commit to it?" And I was like, "Okay." And so there's a really funny recording actually, and for anyone listening to this, if you drop me a message, I'm more than happy to share it. In fact, I think it's a really inspiring piece, and I've shared it with a lot of friends. And he basically got his phone out, and he was like, "All right, we're recording." He's like, "Okay," and so I just was like, "All right, well, I'm going to commit to finishing my book." And I was like, hmm. And I'm going to finish this by, I reckon I can do it by March 2023. And Alex goes, cool. Are you committing to that? And I was like, yeah, yeah, potentially even earlier. And he goes, can I ask you a question? And Tanya, you'll find this quite a bit. He does this, and then I'm like, yeah, okay, go on. And then he says, can you do it in half the time? And I was like, potentially. And he was like, there is no potentially, it's yes or no. And I was like, okay, well, let's figure out what that is. And then it's like May, June, July, August, September, October. Let's call it November. And I was like, yeah, I think so. And then he was like, my birthday's the 20th of November. Can you do it by then? And so I was like, you know what? Yeah, I think I can. You know, I can see it in my head. So I committed to writing it on the 20th of November. And you know, between then and now, the secret to writing a book is just writing, just writing. You know, there's no magic formula. So you know, I took the time and I did that and I got it done. And I said I would commit to finishing a version by the 20th. So I was like, okay, I'll create the Kindle edition. You know, I self-published it on Amazon. Um, and so yeah, you know, I did it within that week, and then I thought, oh, it'd be really cool if I could get a copy to Alex, like a physical copy, like one of these ones. And yeah, so I looked, and then you know, the first opportunity I had to order a copy for him, I was like, okay. And then I looked, it said it's not going to get delivered for another week. So I was like, well, anyway, you know, it's still something. And so I do that, and then on the Sunday of his birthday, like at 2 a.m., yeah, I get a message from Amazon saying this is going to get delivered today, and I was just like, okay, cool. And yeah, lo and behold, at 1:30 p.m. on his birthday, he received a copy of Make Diversity Matter to You, where I'd written in a note saying, I made a commitment to you on 30th of April that I was going to finish this book. Here is a demonstration of my commitment.
That
So
is
that's the story.
amazing that it arrived on the day of the birthday. I mean, this was not within your control, and somehow it happened, which is incredible. I love this story of the commitment of how you kind of, at the end of the day, and it's something also to think about, how you think of time, how you think of, even if we have a little amount of time available, how do you want to utilize it, and how do you see it? Do you see it as little, or do you see it as actually abundance? And that's something he talks about a lot as well. Can you show us the book again? Can we
Yes,
see
Of
please.
it?
course, of course. So this
So
is
make
Make
diversity matter
diversity.
to you. Yeah, love the colors of the book, and would love to kind of, hear about it more. And I don't know if you have a question around that.
Yes, I do. I just have to say, I love that story as well. I love the way you committed to doing half of the time. You delivered on his birthday, and that's just like really magical. What also caught my attention as you were telling the story is I think a lot of people out there are stuck with a half-written book somewhere on their laptop, on their notes, in their head. I know I've self-confession, I'm one of them with a half-written book for the last 2 years or something of the sort. And it's so easy sometimes, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, to get stuck into this kind of mindset. I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll complete it, I'll complete it. What was it? Just, just as a side note, for all these other inspiring authors, just as a bit of a like a go on and write that book. What is it that made you, apart from the pressure from Alex, or I say pressure, the inspiration and kind of a bit of pressure, but what is it that made you go, actually, you know what? I can do this in half of the time. Like, what kind of
mm,
tips would you share for other people out there with a half-written book to inspire them to complete that book? Because I think there's definitely power in a good book and knowledge.
mm. Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I also didn't say I'm a big fan of those earrings. They're very cool.
Oh, thank you.
But to answer the question, actually, I'll mention as well, just on the book, is Make Diversity Matters to You, but there is a subheading that you probably couldn't see, which is increase your confidence in tackling the diversity issues you face in your organization. And I think that was kind of, yeah, where it's aimed at. But I would say, and I think this is the really powerful thing with going into this space around who we're being and, you know, what is talked about in the book, The Ultimate Coach. And I would say that yes, there are techniques, and yes, I did use techniques. You know, there was a meetup group that I'd go on Sundays, and it was amazing. And I'll go again once I'm starting to write my new book. You go on a Sunday, you say hi, you sit down for 2 hours, you write, and then you just say, "How'd you go?" It's amazing. You know, very simple. Now that's a technique, and there are other techniques. Finding motivation, and maybe writing in the morning if you're a morning person, all this sort of stuff. But like honestly, with my coaching and also my own personal philosophy, I move away a little bit from getting too caught up in the techniques. what this was about was a deep, radical transformation in the way that I am showing up in the world that has really shifted, particularly this year. And so when I'm coming from a place that who I am being and who I want to embody, so, what was talked about in that event was sometimes people think about the doing. So you write a book to become an author, and actually it's the other way around. You become an author and then you write a book. You become a writer and then you write. And we get it mixed up in our heads that we have to accomplish the thing before we become the thing. And that means that we're not embodying it. And so when I embody the fact that I'm writing, I've been writing a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn for, well, 2 odd years. I wrote my 101st article last week, and so I'm on 102. And I just checked. I was like, when did I last write that? When did I last miss a week? And it was January 14th. So I've been writing it for like the last 40 weeks in a row. And that wasn't some super conscious decision, and this wasn't some stress. I was embodying someone who really committed to writing my articles every week. And likewise with the book, the amount of personal transformation I've had in all sorts of ways has really shifted the world around me. And so suddenly the idea of writing a book just doesn't, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, you should be proud, and oh, this is like such a big deal. Like, honestly, I was kind of like, yeah, it's cool. I do a bunch of random stuff. This is another one. I didn't expect anyone to particularly care that much. And it's been really humbling, and it's been great, don't get me wrong. But it's also like, yeah, it's just a book. Like, this is my first book. Part of the reason I finished this book is because I want to write another book. So, um, I, the reason, and I'm not being deliberately sort of, what's the word? Like, I'm not deliberately avoiding the question in terms of here's the how-tos, because there's not really a how-to. As I say, the secret to writing a book is writing a book, and then you sit down, you write it, and then you finish it, and then you edit it. And yeah, there's a few bits of how to get it out the door, but yeah, there's no magic formula.
I really love that answer, and something that you said that spoke out to me about embodying who we want to become to enable us to get to where we want to be. So whether it's writing a book, whether it's being a speaker, whatever it is in life. And I'm wondering, who did you need to embody? Who did you need to become to write a book on diversity and inclusion?
It's a funny question because we get it quite a few times. Who do you need to be X? And I even had this conversation yesterday actually about who do I need to be to create real transformation in the world through this book by bringing a new dimension to how we approach diversity, because it's a massive, it's a whole sector of it. There's loads of people working on it. And the person I embody with that is someone who goes out and talks about it. And I did a post this morning about the false humility and self-deprecation and all this stuff around my work. No, taking a stand for it and being like, look, what I can do is really powerful, and going out to the world to say that. So in terms of specifically on the book, who did I need to be? I just needed to be someone who shows up and commits. And there were times where I was tired, but I went up to that meetup group anyway. And someone who had a plan to get this done, and sometimes the plan went a bit left and sometimes a bit right, but just doing it, finding a way. And as I say, there is no magic formula. I think commitment is such a powerful thing, and when we truly commit to a goal, yeah, we can do whatever we want. The sky's the limit. And I've committed to other things that I've realized actually haven't quite served me. So I've committed to like filling my coaching practice by January, and I kind of just was like, I've heard that that's probably a helpful thing, and actually it wasn't that helpful because I didn't really see it, and I wasn't really believing in it. Whereas this was one that I could see myself doing, and I was almost visualizing myself finishing the book. So the person I was being, really, and I am being, is someone who's committing, who is driven by making a positive impact in the world, and yeah, one who shows up in a loving place, and not just doing it for the sake of it.
I guess my
and really
question
wanting
as well,
to change.
yeah,
Yeah, go on.
sorry. I guess my question was as well, specifically around writing a book around diversity and inclusion. So not just writing a book per se, but
Mm.
around something that I think has affected and a lot of us, and especially, I think it had like a kind of punch-on effect after George Floyd's murder, right? Where people started becoming woke about a lot of injustices that were happening and so on.
Mm.
But I know you mentioned earlier on, like you'd started this before that. Anyway, if I correct me if I'm mistaken. But I'm guessing, like, because a lot of people talk about diversity and inclusion and they all want to be involved in equality and so on. But I feel like you took it to another higher, more impactful level by writing a book. And I will come into, you'll share more details on the book with us in a minute. But I'm just trying to think of like who we need to embody within us to really fundamentally care about diversity and inclusion. So whether it's like writing a book and getting that invested in sharing your knowledge, your expertise, your passion really. Um, is that something like, has diversity and inclusion always been a core part of your values, or did you feel like you needed to embody something new to write a book about diversity and inclusion?
Mm. I think so. I'll start with a general comment about writing a book about anything.
Mhm.
I don't think anyone really starts a book feeling like they know everything and know, like, I think one of the biggest barriers is like, who am I to write a book?
Mhm.
And like, yeah, who am I? Like, even when I wrote this, yeah, I could have gone more academic, and there are bits that I could have researched more, whatever. But like, the the most powerful thing that we can realize for ourselves is that we have an incredible power within us to make a change, and we don't have to be experts in things. Now, for me, it was recognizing that, having worked in the space of diversity and inclusion for a couple of years, seen what worked, seen what worked less. Yeah, I had some valuable experiences. I saw, so when I was a half my role was working on diversity and inclusion for my group, and my group was about 500, 600 people. I basically went to my director general. I was like, it would be great to have one-to-ones. And so I had one-to-ones with them for a good couple of months, and then she left, and then the new director general, and I carried on doing it. And so I got this access, and what I realized was that this was a person that really cared about people, but found the diversity stuff frustrating. And yeah, I kind of realized that at no point did she have this space to actually just talk about it, and like talk about the things that was she allowed to say, was she not, and have that safe space. And that's where the real coaching elements come in, of just giving people the space to do it. And so, going back to the point of the book, yes, I had a valuable experience, and an insight that I think can really be a powerful change. At the same time, I think we all have that in some place or another. And so, yeah, I didn't, it's not, it was me being me, and realizing that I didn't need to be something different to write a powerful book. Like, I'm already powerful in myself.
Yeah.
And I don't say that in a, oh yes, because
I
look how
mean,
amazing I am.
this will help a lot of people who are waiting for the right time, waiting to
Mm,
do another course, or having their website finished, or making sure that they have their title handy, and finding excuses to actually do the work. This will help them to kind of think about, okay, let's just, why not me? Why can't I do it? Rather than why me, and having this kind of feeling that they're going to be found out. We love the term imposter syndrome in psychology, but it's true, right? How many more degrees do you need? How much more exposure, how much more experience do you need before you are worthy of actually doing something that you consider yourself not worthy doing? But actually the answer is always, because we're always worthy. So it's actually that shift of perspective, which is amazing. And I just want to kind of dive into your book
mm.
now. And you mentioned, that you created like a model for your company, the cube model. Could you tell us a little bit about it, just on practical terms, and how you've been using it yourself?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for the invitation. And it was taking this inspiration around helping people understand diversity for themselves before going into the whole, well, we need to do this and this. Because, yeah, I mean, when we look at organizations, there are many that they do get criticized because it feels like they're doing it for the sake of it. And I think the really powerful thing that we can do is help individuals, whether they be leaders in any format or just people who care or want to learn more, do it for themselves, or like understand it better for themselves. So the cube model, I just woke up one morning, I was like, oh yeah, it'd be good to have a simple thing for helping people understand this stuff and do some self-inquiry. And so the model is cube. I have a website, you can just download the chapter and whatever. I don't, I'm not doing this for the sales really, but the model is culture, upbringing, bias, and lived experience. And it's fairly straightforward, really. And the questions are very open. And it's essentially asking a bunch of questions. They're non-exhaustive. What is your culture? Was it the mainstream culture of the place that you grew up? How important was culture to you? What was your upbringing? How important was your upbringing? What religion did you grow up with? Biases. Have you had biases from somewhere else? Have you witnessed elements of bias in the workplace? Whatever you want. And then lived experiences. How have that shown up in your life? Those sorts of things. And it's fairly straightforward. It's not a revolutionary thing. It's just the power is in the simplicity. And yeah, so I use this, and I've done a few workshops now where it's just almost like handouts where, yeah, go in a pair. So you could do this for yourself, and the book invites you to do it for yourself, but also going up to someone and just saying, okay, let's have a conversation based on these things. And yeah, what is my culture and stuff. And so a couple of observations. One, it's a much richer, deeper conversation than most workplaces tend to have, because we don't tend to talk about these sorts of things. And so it really brings up these different elements. And when we're talking about building an inclusive workplace, and having those sort of open conversations about our backgrounds, and people feeling able to, is really powerful. The other thing as well is, I think it opens it up. And I did a workshop actually quite recently on this, just a short one, and I was actually paired up with some white men. And what was interesting, the first thing they said was like, "Oh, I'm a white middle class man, so I don't know." And I'm paraphrasing a bit, but I don't know what I can really say on this. And it's like, well, this is a little bit the issue. Like, they feel alienated from the conversation, and that means that actually it's not bringing them in, and that's also a critical element. And when I like the first question, "What is your culture?" They were like, "I don't know if I have a culture." And then after some prompting, actually, it was like, "Yeah, well, I've got some family from this place and this, and actually, one was from, I don't know, Wales or Scotland or that." Anyway, and so one of the issues around diversity is that for people in the majority, actually, quite often they don't realize that they do have things like culture and things like that. What they see as the norm is kind of as if that's the norm for everyone. And so it's, once they understand that better for themselves, and then we're talking about diversity, it's like, oh right, okay, that's what we're talking about. So that's one quite big element of the book. Obviously, there's others, but I think it can be really powerful just to open up that conversation.
Yeah, and I love the example you gave about the white men responding this. At the same time, it is a response saying that, we haven't been exposed to diversity in our upbringing. That is a cultural problem, but it is a culture as well, right? The fact that maybe their parents haven't made the effort of finding diverse group of people, diverse ways of thinking as well, etc. I think I really believe in the commitment of parents to, and I know Anne, you share the same view as me on that, the commitment of parents to kind of look outside of the little council and community, and try and expose the children to diversity of thought and a diversity of skin color, and having the conversation. So that per se, it's a cultural problem. So it is a culture itself. I don't know what you think of that.
I I don't think it's a cultural problem. I think it's just culture. Like I
Yeah.
think what I would say is that when we label it a problem in of itself, it's almost, that's where we can bring up these emotions that it's quite a, this is your fault because dot dot dot. And yes, we can recognize that there is an issue in terms of how we can, you know, better be inclusive as a society and things. But I think the starting point is recognizing where we are at right now. And yeah, I don't think it helps us so much to be like, oh well, our parents should have done this and that. What I'm interested in, and what I see as the most powerful way of bringing the conversation forward, is, okay, well, where are we right now? And when they first started, it was, oh, do I have a culture? And then, oh, actually, yeah, I do. And it's completely normal. It's completely fair that there wasn't a prompt for them to think about these questions. If you're not from a minority group, a lot of us that are from minority groups have had those thoughts, and so and had those prompts to have these sorts of thoughts. So this is about helping others as well, of just going on that journey to understand it for themselves. And I think that's the real power, because then we can have those conversations around whatever we want to talk about on diversity inclusion strategies and things like that. But if you've not had the fundamental basis that, oh, yeah, I haven't really thought about the idea of what culture even means for growing up, then it's very hard to really make an impact.
I think you've got a really interesting model with your cube model where you talk about culture, upbringing, biases, and experiences. And in a way, I feel like they're all intertwined because our culture will partly form our upbringing will form our biases, and our biases will inform or affect our experiences, and experiences will also affect our biases. When you're working using this model, do you find that, and I'm just going to go back specifically to the culture and the upbringing,
Mm.
that there's a lot of intertwinement. And I'll just give you an example, which is from a personal perspective, for example. So I see myself, well, I am a Black Kenyan woman brought up in Europe, in various places in Europe. So my culture is Kenyan, and it is Black African, but it's also my upbringing is also brought up in different places, but still bringing in that same culture. So sometimes I find it really interesting when we're talking about upbringing and culture and trying to separate the two. How do you go about that when you're using your cube model?
So, like, to be honest, I see it more as a prompt. Like, people, what we call culture and upbringing and stuff, each of us, and this is where the coaching stuff has really helped me understand it for myself. We all have different, slightly different definitions of these things anyway. And so it's not, the point of this is not to get too hung up on like the conversations. And, sometimes I've been in conversations with people and then they want to talk more about accents and stuff. And that's still really rich. And so I personally don't get too hung up on trying to differentiate between these. It's more about prompting the conversations to open it up and see where it leads for people. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think it's just the recognition that we can spend a lot of time getting quite sort of academic on this, but that's not where the value is. I think it's the self-inquiry as a whole. That's what I find.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of humility here to kind of say, okay, we might have different thoughts and different prejudices about things, but at the end of the day, it's not about analyzing these and trying to change everything about these and trying to dwell on the past and understanding what has happened in your childhood, but it's exactly to kind of move on from it and maybe make a different present and future definition, so that actually you can amend the past in a way by doing that. You kind of make different choices rather than being hung up on every single little detail. I think that's a great lesson also that we have discovered. And when we were talking about our motherhood journey and everything, like there's so much that you can talk about the past. Great, you can't forget the past, of course, there's always utility around that, but dwelling on it and kind of trying to kind of change everything about what it means is not going to make a difference. But what we need to focus on is the people that really want to do the work.
I agree with you. Just because of time, I just wanted to ask you one final question before we kind of wrap things up. Given your experience of working in the space of diversity and inclusion, given your experience of writing this book, what would you like to share with the listeners, like a final takeaway gift, if you like, on one of the best things perhaps you've learned on this journey so far around diversity and inclusion?
Mm. So I think it's a really rich vein. I mean, just as a quick comment, and then there is something broader that I think is really powerful in this book. The first thing is that we often talk around like issues and stuff when we're talking about diversity, and let's not forget it's a really beautiful thing in terms of learning about others and experiencing that culture, and the fundamental basis for inclusion is that it also is more productive. You get better ideas, you get a much wider range, you have access to more information and things like that. So that just as something to recall on. Now, the one thing that I do want to say that I think is where I've seen the most fundamental shift with diversity. And for myself and stuff, we often talk about this idea that, working in diversity, it's quite tough on the mental well-being, and it's quite stressful, and it's an uphill battle, etc. It's the later chapters around this idea of being and who we want to be on a day-to-day basis, and shifting our relationship with our thoughts around this stuff. That can be incredibly powerful. Both if you're a diversity inclusion practitioner, feeling quite like, oh, it's heavy, it's tough, all this stuff. Well, when we can reframe those thoughts to it not being oh, I'm fighting against the system, to, okay, well, look at the impact I'm having, and being accepting of the things that are the things that we perhaps would prefer changed, but then bringing our full energy in a positive way, that has completely shifted it. The way people receive me now is so different, and I get so much more done, to be honest, because I'm not coming with this, oh, well, this is all broken, and oh, this is all crap, but this is what we need to do. And when I'm coming with that energy to, I don't know, a leader or something, it doesn't cut through in the same way, where, okay, I really recognize it. The content's pretty similar, but it's where I'm coming from and being a lot more loving and understanding with it. And that's where the really powerful transformational stuff in the fifth chapter or so is, where it's about how we are being on a day-to-day basis. Because and that's not just for diversity and inclusion practitioners, it's also for, if you're a leader or a worker. Quite often we think of ourselves as like nice people, but let's say we get stressed, we kind of miss these things. And so the thing with the being is, like, I've even got like my own document, and it's on my wall, and it's who I am embodying on a day-to-day basis. And so how can I be a loving, kind person? And that's transcending, diversity, but it's just everything. How can I be more supportive, and be actively doing that on a day-to-day basis, not when, a month before my performance review or whatever. It's how can I do it now? And yeah, so that's really brought shifts to me, because I notice myself being a lot more loving when I speak to my family and with my friends, um, thinking about things and seeing others in their highest level of being, even when they are not necessarily acting in that way. And it's just so much more powerful. People are really attracted to like the vulnerability and the genuine loving level that we can approach life when we tap into that, and it's available for every single one of us.
Thank you for that. I think I really loved the concept that you brought in about who we are trying to be and who we're embodying to be. And as you said, it transcends well beyond diversity and inclusion. It transcends into your everyday everyday life, really. As you're saying, I want to be a kinder person, and so on. And I think that's such a positive thing for anyone listening in to take away. What kind of positive traits do you want to embody within yourself to help you attain what you want to attain in your life, whether it's be a better advocate of diversity and inclusion, write a book, start a business, whatever it is. Just be a nicer parent, be a nicer human being in general. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that. Before we let you go, I just wanted to ask, how is the best way to get in touch with you and to get a hold of your book as well?
For sure. So it's published through Amazon. Firstly, the book, it's called Make Diversity Matter to You. Um, and it's on the different Amazons in most of them, so the UK, US, France, Spain, Italy, etc., and Germany. So you can find a copy there. If you can't get a hold of it, you can drop me a line. I can see if I can send you one. Depends where you are. I looked at sending one to India. It was like 40 euros, bit tight. In terms of getting in contact, so you can follow me on Instagram, and LinkedIn is where I post a lot. What I would also do as a really clear invitation, if you've got something from this conversation, I would really love to hear from you. So drop me a message, and I will send you a chapter of why, the chapter within the book that talks about why diversity matters to me and my own personal journey on it. So yeah, if you're interested, drop me a line. I would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And we'll put all those tags as well, your social media tags and the link to the book as well, the Amazon link to the book on the show notes of this. So it'll be easy for people to get a hold of it. I just want to thank you so much again, Tahmid, for being on Purple Coach Conversations, for having a very honest, open conversation and a very inspiring, positive conversation as well, where I think it also transcended beyond diversity and inclusion, which for me, I find is always quite magical when we have conversations and it just kind of spills out into life. So thank you so much for that. I also want to thank all our listeners for listening to the series once again. We appreciate you as always. Don't forget to share and like and share it as well with your friends and family and anyone else that you think would find it valuable. We thank you once again, and we look forward to having you your feedback as well. Do drop Tahmid comments and so on and feedback. So much appreciated, everyone. Take care for now, and thank you very much. Bye.